If New Orleans Saints second-year wide receiver A.T. Perry can up his game in 3 elements, he could be the Saints' next solution at X receiver. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at newly signed linebacker Khaleke Hudson and what his role can be in New Orleans, because there's one carved out for him for certain. We're also going to be taking a look at A.T. Perry. I'm going to explain to you why not all contested catches are made the same, what we really mean when we say that somebody needs to be a contested catch receiver. And of course, we're going to be taking a look at 3 elements of the game that A.T. Perry can develop over the course of this offseason that would allow him to be the Saints' answer at X receiver after the departure of Michael Thomas. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I want to dive right into this A.T. Perry conversation. There's 3 elements of the game that if A.T. Perry can take some, not necessarily considerable steps ahead, but if he could just further develop and grow his game in these 3 arenas, it really could set him up to be the answer for the New Orleans Saints at X receiver since the departure of Michael Thomas. So let me be very clear before we list those 3 things. What I'm not saying is that A.T. Perry is going to be the next Michael Thomas. Those expectations are unfair. Those expectations are, not without, they are unwarranted, all those other things. And honestly, they're irrelevant. You don't want A.T. Perry to be the next Michael Thomas. You want A.T. Perry to be the best A.T. Perry that he can be in this New Orleans Saints organization. So I just want to be very clear of what I mean by that. What I'm talking about instead is simply filling in the role, right? There are not a lot of bona fide X receivers in the NFL. You've got a couple of guys like, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase is probably one of those guys, and others. So there's maybe like a handful of those guys. But, and of course, the only ones that are coming to mind are the LSU ones. But you get what I'm saying. Like, Tyreek Hill is a number 1 option, but he's not an X receiver, right? So there's those types of receivers that we're talking about here. DK Metcalf is a quintessential X receiver. A.J. Brown, quintessential X receiver. There we go. A couple of other non-LSU examples for you. So can A.T. Perry grow into that type of role? Again, not comparing him to those players, but into that role. There are 3 things that he's got to be able to do. The first of which is one that he started to prove towards the end of the season, and that was that he could win the jump ball. We started to see that towards the end of the year, the big catch against Los Angeles Rams, the touchdown catches against the Atlanta Falcons. Really, that Atlanta Falcons game, you watch several jump balls get won, and those are the 50-50 balls. The other thing is that he's got to prove that he can be a contested catch receiver. Now, we're really going to dive into the contested catch receiver part in the next segment, because that's a really deep conversation. And thanks to our Locked On Saints insiders, and in particular Martin, who asked a question in our exclusive Q&A that we did earlier this week around A.T. Perry, I've got a lot to discuss there in terms of what a contested catch receiver actually is, because it's not just about the 50-50 jump balls and the face catching and things like that. So he's already started to lean his way to showing a little bit of what he can do as a contested catch receiver, but there's a lot more that he's got to be able to show there. He's answering the jump ball questions, though. He's just got to continue to do that over the course of training camp. So then the last thing, and the thing that I want to dive into here is, can he grow his game as a short and intermediate receiver? During his time at Wake Forest, when he was coming out of college, we were big fans of him here on the show, loved mocking him to New Orleans, was grateful that the Saints turned around and actually drafted him because it just felt like the right fit. And one of the reasons why we liked the fit is because he had the bigger body, but he also had more speed, and he also had good vertical ability. And so having him be a guy that can be sort of a faster X receiver was really a part of the appeal. So the next thing he's got to be able to show is, can he develop his game in the short and intermediate areas of the field? He was only targeted 4 times in the short area of the field, and the short area of the field is defined by 0 to 9 yards from the line of scrimmage. He was a little bit more utilized as an intermediate and as a deep threat. Certainly used as a jump ball guy in the end zone, in the red zone, all of those other things. That's great. But can you help the team move the ball 4, 5, 6 yards at a time? Because this is the thing that we always talk about here. If you're on an offense that can move the ball 4 yards in advance every single play, you're going undefeated in the NFL, right? And you're not really going to get that, of course, because that's not always going to be the case. And it's never going to be the case. But if you can help your team move the ball 4, 5, 6 yards, you're undeniably valuable to your team. And if you're going to be the guy that's going to be the X receiver, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the number one option. Like Chris Olave can be the number one option without being the X receiver. Juwan Johnson in the right game plan, going up against the right defense, can be the number one option without being the X receiver. But sometimes your X receiver has to be your number one option. Need 5 yards on 3rd and 5 in order to seal this, in order to extend this lead, or, in order to, convert and not give the ball up with one possession score difference in the lead, or need to keep this drive alive because you've got to put points on the board. Can A.T. Perry be that guy for you? And the answer is hopefully yes, right? From the New Orleans Saints organization's perspective, from the fan perspective, all those other things. But we haven't gotten to see that yet. That doesn't mean that A.T. Perry can't do it. Just he hasn't been asked to do it yet. But if he's going to be the X receiver going into 2024, or unless that's going to be Cedric Wilson or some other player that ends up being drafted and or signed or acquired in some way, it's got to be him, right? So unless there's somebody else stepping in, like he's the guy. And so if he can show that he can do that, I think that ends up going a pretty good step for him. Remember, the New Orleans Saints, out of 20 drop Derek Carr passes, 15 of them came between 0 to 9 yards. So not only do you have to be able to run the routes there to create the separation, which, NFL separation is 1 yard. So be able to create the separation, run the routes that will be able to get you open and get the right angle for the quarterback on those routes, all those other things. Can the pass protection hold up? All those other pieces. Beyond all of that, and really before any of that, is can you catch the football, right? And A.T. Perry's got some pretty solid hands. We saw him in training camp and in the preseason maybe struggle a little bit with hands when it came to the contested catches, but otherwise, like pretty solid hands, wasn't putting the ball on the ground a ton, all that. And this is where you would have to see that at its absolute best, is in that 0 to 9 yards. At the Saints having 15 drops in that area is just kind of wild, right? And so you want to be able to mitigate that. So if A.T. Perry is going to take steps forward over the course of this offseason, in addition to continuing to show that he can make the jump ball catches, he's got to be able to show that he could be a weapon and a threat, most importantly, right? Not just a weapon for the offense, but a threat against the opposing defense in that short area of the field. Slants, digs, quick outs, all of those things that are going to help you take a 1st and 10 and turn it into a 2nd and 6. Take a 2nd and 10, turn it into a 3rd and 4. Like those are the types, or take a 2nd and 6 and turn it into a 3rd and 1 even. Like those are the types of things that you need. Like if you're able to turn around, hand the ball off to Alvin Kamara, ideally not between the tackles, but instead get him around the tackles. Clint Kubiak, this is for you. If you're like, that's going to be such a big thing that everybody's looking for, is how is Alvin Kamara being utilized in the new offense? So getting him outside the tackles and picking up 4 yards, and then you're in a 2nd and 6, and then you can get the ball to A.T. Perry to pick up another 4, and you're in a 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1 type situation. That's what you want, right? You want to be ahead of yourself. That's where a guy like A.T. Perry, if he can show over the course of this offseason that he can be that weapon in the short area of the field between 0 to 9 yards, he ends up being a shoo-in, honestly, for that X receiver role. But beyond all of that, he's got to show that he's a contested catch receiver as well. And I know we talked about the jump ball side of it, but let me explain why contested catches aren't just about the 50-50 ball. It's not just about the jump ball and what A.T. Perry would else, that kind of third element of what he would have to show in order to become that X receiver in 2024. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. I use eBay Motors all the time because I'm always looking at different things to do with the car, or even not necessarily like parts and accessories, or not necessarily like parts and things like that, but sometimes accessories, where like I just want to have something at the ready in case of an emergency, all those other things. So passion, drive, patience, all the things that will end up creating a championship team are all the same things that keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to be able to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. You want superchargers? Got it. Roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Yes, yes, yes. And much yes, because they got a lot of stuff there. So whether you're looking into speed, power, or a little bit of finesse, eBay Motors is going to be able to get you everything that you need and have you covered. With over 122 parts for your number one ride or die. You're always going to find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, it's guaranteed to fit the first time, every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So with all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, make sure you're checking out eBay Motors today to turn your car into an MVP and bring home them W's. Keep your ride or die alive with ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply, and eBay guarantee fit available only to U.S. customers. All right, family. When it comes to becoming a contested catch receiver or proving that you can be a contested catch receiver, the jump balls, the 50-50 balls, the face catching, all those things are nice, but that's not the whole story. And that's where A.T. Perry is going to have to show his next evolution in terms of the way that he can contribute as a contested catch receiver, make it some tough catches in different areas of the field. That's what we got coming up for you here as we take a look at A.T. Perry fitting into the X receiver role for the New Orleans Saints post departure of Michael Thomas. We appreciate you very much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Next, make sure you go and check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national sports 24/7 stream on YouTube from the local experts that know what's going on within their markets. It's not just screaming and shouting like you see on some of these other networks. We got you covered with the people that know and the people that are there. You can find that over at Locked On Sports Today on YouTube for that 24/7 stream, first of its kind. You can also find it, of course, on the free Amazon Fire TV channels apps. All right, so A.T. Perry. I have high hopes for A.T. Perry. Not hopes. I don't really have hope. Hope's not really a thing for me, but I have high expectations for A.T. Perry in terms of like where he can be as a pro. Let me put it that way. Like I'm high on A.T. Perry's ceiling, I think is the big thing. And a big part of him being able to reach that ceiling is his ability to make tough catches. And we really saw a demonstration of that when his year really started to come together at the end of the season last year in the final 5 games of the 2023 season, where we saw him pull together all 246 of his receiving yards, all 4 of his receiving touchdowns, particularly had kind of this, a rival game. I'm not going to call it a breakout game because I think he has his breakout. Like, to me, he's a breakout candidate for 2024. So I'm not going to call it a breakout game, but he kind of had his arrival game against the Atlanta Falcons to close out the season. We actually saw that from him and Kendre Miller all at the same time, which was nice, which was good to see. So when I talk about A.T. Perry, I wanted to be very clear that I'm high on what he can be for the New Orleans Saints. I have been. I mean, if you're an everydayer, and if you've been around since the last draft cycle, I don't think there's anybody that I mocked to the Saints outside of Brian Brzee more than A.T. Perry. It just made a lot of sense in terms of what the New Orleans Saints were looking for. And so this year, in terms of what they're looking for, he can also be the solution again, right? And a lot of that is filling into that Michael Thomas role. It doesn't have to do that with a Michael Thomas level of production, but certainly somebody that can get you, 70 plus catches or so to help you move the ball. There's obviously value in them. So one of the ways that he's going to have to show that he can do that is by continuously proving that he's a contested catch receiver. Now you've heard me already talk about the jump balls and things like that, but thanks to a question that one of our Locked On Saints insiders asked during our exclusive Q&A, what we realized, and one of the things that I discussed was, not all contested catches are made the same. Sometimes the contested catches, yes, bodying a DB, jostling for position to get underneath a pass where you and that DB both try to jump for the pass and see who can make the catch, right? The jump ball, 50-50 ball, all those other things. But sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's, can you make a catch on a slant going to the middle of the field when a linebacker is crashing down over the top, right? So can you still make that catch? Can you run that in route, same thing, and try to, have to make that catch before you're met by that linebacker or as you're met by that linebacker? What about running a post, running an out, running an in, running a slant, like any of these routes that bring you either to the inside or outside of the field, and a defensive back or a cornerback is behind you trying to guard in what's called trail technique? That's where they effectively try to get position on your inside hip, basically. Or let's call it like your lower or inside hip, depending upon the type of route that you're running. Are you able to extend your hands, get outside, avoid the contact, fight off the hands, whatever it might be, play through the hands of the defender to make that catch without it being a vertical play? Can you make it laterally across the field? Think about like the gauntlet drill in the combine. Can you make that play going towards the sideline and staying in bounds? Can you make that play falling over or diving or any of those other things. Like think about all the times that Michael Thomas caught slants and slid as he was catching the slant, right? Because you just needed 3 yards. The slant went to 4, boom. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Can you, and this is a really tough one, and this is actually where I really like what we've started to see from Chris Olave more and more and more, is can you run a hitch or a comeback to where you're either, pushing upfield and then coming back towards the quarterback, towards the inside of the field, or coming back to the line of scrimmage towards the outside of the field? Can you run that route and fight through double coverage by attacking the football, coming down to make a play at the football, as opposed to waiting for the football to make it through? I'm illustrating all of these things because these are all things that we think about when we're talking about a contested catch receiver. I'm not illustrating these things because we haven't seen A.T. Perry do them before, or we believe that A.T. Perry can't do them. It's just like these are the things that he has to show over the course of the offseason. These are the things that we're going to be looking at in training camp to see if he would be able to step into that X receiver role. And then beyond that, if you make that catch, do you have the wherewithal, do you have the athleticism to then turn it upfield and pick up 1 or 2 extra yards, fight for 1 or 2 extra yards? Can you go out there and give all of the effort that somebody would give on a 60-yard catch and run? Can you give that same amount of effort in the one burst that it takes you to get upfield to pick up 1 or 2 yards? So then we get into mentality, ferocity, all of those other things. Those are the things that you also need to see just kind of mentality-wise from A.T. Perry. Again, not to say that we haven't seen them, not to say that, like, honestly, he hasn't gotten this opportunity yet to show any of these things. So it's not about overcoming some kind of a shortcoming. It's just about, hey, show these things just so that you can check these boxes before the Saints are comfortable doing this thing. And on the flip side of that, the Saints have to put A.T. Perry in position to prove those things over the course of the offseason. Because if you don't, then you won't learn them, right? If you don't put him through it, if you don't give him the opportunity or put him in position to show you those things, you ain't going to see him, right? And that would be on the Saints if they're not putting him in those positions to do those things. But I think he'll get those opportunities. So when we talk about like a contested catch receiver, I urge not to just think about going up with 2 hands to make a catch from a standing position on a jump ball situation in the back of an end zone. That's important because that'll get you 7 points, or at least 6 points. But I mean, if you want to be able to move the ball more consistently in the passing game than what we saw last year, without always needing the chunk plays, which kind of felt like where the Saints were last year, where oftentimes they just really needed the chunk play to get them going. But instead, if you're able to kind of death by paper cuts, move the ball by attacking the middle of the field and all those other things, in order to be able to do that, like that's where your offense takes its next step. That's where your players can take their next step. But in order to be able to do that, you got to be able to make tough catches, because you're going to the middle of the field where things are congested, where it's highly populated, where people are looking to get a hit in, all those other things. Can A.T. Perry get the opportunity, A, to show that he can do those things, and B, if given that opportunity, can he make good on it? That's what we'll be paying attention to during the offseason. But if he does make good on those things, he's a shoo-in. He's a shoo-in for that X receiver role that Michael Thomas has vacated. Coming up next, we're going to take a look at a new signing for the New Orleans Saints. Khaleke Hudson. New Orleans Saints have been busy when it comes to linebackers. Now they add another one. But don't get it twisted. There is a clear and obvious impact and role for Hudson. Let's break it all down as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Well, it's Robinhood's IRA. It's the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most out of your retirement thanks to their IRA with 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info, claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risks, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks, and 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years, and the 3% matching on transfers is subject to terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. All right, family. New Orleans Saints linebacker Khaleke Hudson might not be a household name, but he definitely has a role here in New Orleans. And it's an important one that the New Orleans Saints lost a lot of options at over the course of free agency so far with the attrition that they have seen. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always. Don't forget, we are your team every day. That means Monday, Mock Draft Monday. We'll be on the road a lot next week, so it's going to be a lot of fun and everything like that. But of course, we'll continue to get you these daily episodes. We're looking at Mock Draft Monday next week in terms of a potential just look at like trading up in the mid rounds, right? Like how to really utilize and maximize those fifth round selections, of which the Saints have four. We're going to be doing a lot of that on Monday. So appreciate you very much for coming through and being every day you're here. And of course, big thank you to everybody who's finding the show for the first time as well. Hope that you'll stick around. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So as we look at this signing for the New Orleans Saints, Khaleke Hudson, 6 foot, 220-pound linebacker, was originally a fifth round selection by the Washington Commanders. He's coming into New Orleans and is going to have a role, even though it's not going to be on the defensive side. He is a very solid special teamer, a guy that was a standout special teamer for the Washington Commanders. And look, I get it. It's not always the thing that sells everybody on a player and everything like that. And I know I'm the special teams guy. It's part of my brand. So I'm not just saying this, though. I think that the big thing that you have to look at for the New Orleans Saints, that when they lost Zach Bond, not only did they lose that Sam linebacker / edge rusher that they were finally discovering how to utilize at the end of 2023, but they lost a core special teamer, Nephi Sewell, who was a guy that was coming along as that strong side linebacker as well, which helped to open up Zach Bond to go and work with the defensive line and do a little bit more there. He had the ACL injury, or let's just call it the leg injury, and then, had surgery and is not going to be ready for training camp as we understand it. So with that, you lose another core special teamer, at least throughout training camp, maybe even going into the beginning of the season. We'll see how that goes. One thing to quickly highlight, by the way, the NFL changed the rules, and now, it used to be that when you made the cut down to 53, you would have to cut a player and then sign them back and then put them, or not cut them. You would have to either cut a player, sign them back, or and then put them on injured reserve, or you would have to carry them in on the 53-man roster and then move them to injured reserve and then make more moves after that. That's actually the way that would work. You would carry them in on the 53 cut and then move them to injured reserve. Now, you actually move 2 players to injured reserve in addition to making over your 53. So that's really good news, because that also means that those guys don't have to, miss the PUP and like all these other things. So a couple different ways, or miss games based on being on PUP, like if that's not necessarily the situation, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of different ways to kind of address this now. So a guy like Nephi Sewell could start the season on injured reserve without actually taking up a roster spot in the process, right? To where one other player has to be cut so you can carry him in, move him to injured reserve, and then try to get that other player back. Good news. The other thing that I look at here is that the Saints lost Ryan Connolly, on an expiring contract, Ty Summers on an expiring contract, and others. Of course, they still have DeMarco Jackson, and then they signed Willie Gay earlier this offseason. And then, of course, they also have other guys like, DeMario Davis and Pete Werner, who are your incumbent and clear starters going into 2024 at their respective linebacker spots. Willie Gay is your other. So where Khaleke Hudson fits in is that he helps you out with that loss of all of that special teams talent. Zach Bond had a big role there. Ryan Connolly, when he was healthy, had a big role in special teams. Ty Summers had a huge role in special teams. Nephi Sewell had a huge role in special teams. So now you get a guy like Khaleke Hudson, who also, by the way, has several starts in his career. So he has playing experience on the defensive side. So he gives you some depth, right? Some experience depth. Now he's 6 foot, 220 pounds. So he's a little light to be thrown out into the middle of a defense and everything like that. But hey, you're starting to move players around a little bit more. If you're starting to kind of modernize that approach over on the defensive side, then that's certainly something that could potentially happen. Although, the New Orleans Saints have been just fine with the way that they've operated on defense, with the exception of the run game, right? The run defense. So he gives you somebody that can help out when it comes to depth and has experience being on the field and starting games and all these other things. So that's good news. But I really think that the biggest elevation that you get with him is to that special teams core. Like, we know how important special teams is for the New Orleans Saints. They love to play the field position game. They want to flip the field. They want to make things tough on you. And the thing that I will say too is that now with the way that the new kickoff rule is, which was, kind of shepherded through like the XFL, then Darren Rizzi and some others worked on it for a couple of years to try to get it passed and everything like that. And it's finally passed, which I think is actually good for the game because it brings the kick return back into the game, even though it takes the onside kick surprise out. Not that onside kicks were working anyway. Onside kick got taken out of the game a year ago when they screwed with those rules too much. And then now you're basically just kind of now being able to say, okay, nobody cares about the onside kick ain't happening, whatever. And then so now at least you're putting kick returns back in the game because you can't, if you kick it out of the end zone, you take it up to the 35 now, like you're giving an extra 10 yards, you got to be able to cover everything like that. So with the players now starting on the 40, which is typically the average location for that line of defenders or coverage players by the time that the pass catcher or the returner catches the ball anyway. So nothing really changes there. You are going to need to be able to get, though, from standing to sprinting, right? So you're going to need speed. You're going to need athleticism. That's where I think a guy like Khaleke Hudson really can excel in this new kickoff coverage. And, in the punt game and everything like that, nothing's really going to change there. It can be a good up man for you that gets downfield quicker, like all these other things. So I like the signing of Khaleke Hudson. I feel a lot better about the signing of Khaleke Hudson than I have about some of the other signings earlier, like Nathan Peterman and things like that. But this one to me makes a lot of sense, even though it's not, no one's going to hang a banner over this signing. Like people aren't going to celebrate this signing. People are probably barely even going to talk about this signing. But what the New Orleans Saints do and the way that they want to be able to control the field position game, the fact that Darren Rizzi is the guy that was on the forefront of getting the kickoff change, the kickoff rule change done. The Saints are going to have a little bit of a head start on everybody else on how to defend this, how to capitalize on it, how to return it, all these other things. So go and get the talent that's going to allow you to be able to do that. And certainly, like when you think about kicking coverage, I don't know if people really know this very much, but you know how offense will come out and they'll get in the huddle, and then based on the number of receivers or tight ends or whatever that they have, the defense will come out, but they'll match the personnel of the offense, matching personnel. So if you see 3 wide receivers in the huddle, then you're going to send out your nickel package on defense and have their ring. So the way the kickoff works is that actually it's the team that's kicking off that sets the personnel first, and then the return team matches personnel to the coverage team. So you set the precedent as the coverage team. And so when you put a lot of speed out there on the field, they're going to put a lot of lighter bodies out there on the field because they have to have the speed to be able to compete with that. And so they'll have like speed packages, they'll have, blocker packages, all these other things. And so if you've got guys who are speedy, athletic, and can tackle, Khaleke Hudson, check. Those are the types of athletes that you want in this new kickoff, arrangement and environment. And I think that is one of the reasons why this signing works for New Orleans, assuming that he's able to show that he can do that. I'm explaining what the vision is. We'll find out what the reality is in Irvine, California during training camp. All right, y'all. Appreciate you very much for being here and making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Pels with Jake Madison and Locked On LSU with Caroline Fenton. Haley Van Lith officially transferring from the LSU women's basketball team. What does that mean for LSU and why it's actually a good move for both sides? Caroline Fenton is going to be breaking all that down and much more over at Locked On LSU. Appreciate you as always, making us your first listen, and of course, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.